I remember her very vividly, and she stands out in my mind and the influence that she had. What about you? My guess is that you probably remember somebody in your life like that as well. Someone who had a strong influence in your life. And you can recall that. You can call that to mind pretty easily. Today we want to talk about a Bible character, one of the very oldest Bible characters, whose example still stands out strongly. And we want to use for our text, part of that Braden read for us earlier, we want to talk about Abel. In Hebrews chapter 11, verse 4, it says, "By faith Abel offered unto God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, by which he obtained witness that he was righteous, God testifying of his gifts, and by it he being dead yet speaketh." And that's the phrase that we want to build upon this morning. He being dead yet speaketh. So he speaks to us. He's been dead a long time. He's been dead thousands of years. Not just a few decades, but thousands of years. Abel has been dead. What does he still say to us? He being dead yet speaketh. That'll be our study for a few minutes this morning. Thank you for being here. We appreciate your interest and your diligence and your effort to be here this morning to worship God together. Certainly as we come together, we put as our first and most important priority that we will honor and glorify Him with the worship that we offer this morning. But secondly, as we were even studying in our Bible class, a big part of why we come together is to edify, to build up, and to strengthen the body of Christ. And we hope all of us will be edified by the time that we spend together this morning. We appreciate you for being here so much. And for those who are visiting with us, thank you for being here. Please come again whenever you can. All right, so Abel, concerning Abel, it says, he being dead yet speaketh. So what does he tell us? Well, there's a lot of things that could be pointed out. I've got a few in mind. The first of them being, it is clear that God observes our lives. There are people who argue that God was just like a clockmaker. That when He created the universe and everything in it, including planet Earth and the people on planet Earth and everything that exists, that God created it, He sort of wound it up like a clock and He set it on a shelf and He left it alone. And He went away and just for this to do its own thing, this creation of His to do its own thing. That's definitely not the case, because here we have a very early point in time, in created time. The case of Cain and Abel is very early on in the very first chapters of Genesis. And so from a very early time point, we can see that God was intimately involved in the affairs of mankind. He was aware, He was involved, and He cared. And that is true for us also. God knows us. And He knows the intricate details of our lives. He knows what we're dealing with. He knows what we're doing. And He observes all of that. In Proverbs chapter 15, verse 3, it says, "The eyes of the Lord are in every place, beholding the evil and the good." Very often we stress that God is beholding the evil, and it's true. And we got to be aware of that. But He's also observing the good, and that's important. And this, in the case of Abel, it was this, right? God was observing what Abel did, and it was a good thing that he did. And so for us, this statement that the Lord is in every place, beholding the evil and the good, it should be a warning. Be warned that He will know if you do any evil, but be comforted in knowing that God is aware of the good things that you do too, and He will bless you for those things. In Hebrews chapter 4, verse 13, it says, "Neither is there any creature that's not manifest in His sight, but all things are naked and open unto the eyes of Him with whom we have to do." This is a strict warning that comes from the Hebrew writers. The things that you do they are absolutely not hidden from God. I was reading about a man recently named Clarence King. I'm sure you've never heard of Clarence King. He lived back in the 1800s. In fact, he died in 1901. So this is a long time ago, this Clarence King. He was a rich man. He was well educated. He had a degree from Yale. He was a geologist. He was a scientist, a geologist. But even though he had those things true in his life, he lived a separate life, a secret double life that he lived. He lived in this separate double secret life. He lived as a black man, and he was married, and he had children. And so he was living a double life, and nobody knew that these two different things were going on in his life, a secret double life. And he kept that secret. In fact, it was not known that he was living this double life until he confessed it on his deathbed. And as I said, he died in 1901. What about you? Well, my guess is that you will not be able to keep your secrets all the way to your deathbed. But let's say you did. You were doing things that nobody ever knew about. And you kept it secret. That's pretty hard to accomplish. I'm pretty impressed with this guy named Clarence King, that he could keep that double life secret all the way up to the point of his death. What if he had never confessed it? What if he took that secret to his grave? God still knew about it. We can keep secrets, usually not totally successfully, but no matter how well you keep your secrets, they will not be kept secret from God. God is aware. God observes our lives. And that's one of the things we could point out from this case with Abel. Now, right here, before we move from this point, the things that God observed, in the context of this historic event with Cain and Abel, what he was observing was their worship, right? He was observing the worship that they offered. And so included in all the things that God sees about us and knows about us and observes about us, he observes our worship. He knows how we worship. He knows our hearts as we engage in worship. And we always ought to keep that in mind. Let me suggest to you that the story of Cain and Abel being dead, still speaks. Let me suggest to you that we learn from this story that faith requires obedience. Here's a point that we are often forced to repeat, because a lot of people think that faith is separate from obedience. We understand that saving faith is an obedient faith, a faith that works, a faith that obeys the instructions of God. This is really common sense, I believe. If you really believe, then you will act upon what you believe. Let me suggest to you that I have $1 million buried in my backyard. Do you believe that? I don't think you believe that, do you? If you did believe that, so I've got $1 million buried in my backyard and you can have it. Come and get it. Do you believe that? I don't think you do. But if you really did believe that, what would you do? I think you'd be out in my backyard with a shovel digging all afternoon until you found it, right? If you really believed it, you would act upon what you believe. Now that's common sense, as we said, and that's what we're saying here about believing God and believing the things that God says and believing the promises that God makes. If we really believe, then we will act in obedience. In James chapter 2, verse 18, yea, a man may say, thou hast faith, I have works. Show me thy faith without thy works, and I will show thee my faith by my works. James says that the way that you really demonstrate faith is by what you do. You can talk about it all you want, but you don't have any way of verifying your faith unless it's demonstrated in your humble obedience. In Hebrews chapter 11, now our text this morning, it comes from this chapter, Hebrews 11. It's Hebrews 11 verse 4, where it talks about Abel, he being dead yet speaketh, and we're building our lesson on that expression. But you know well that Hebrews 11 goes on to describe many characters of faith. And as we stress so often, in every case when it mentions their faith, it goes right on to talk about what they did. They had faith and they did this. Chapter 11 of Hebrews, verse 7. By faith Noah prepared an ark. Verse 8. By faith Abraham went out, not knowing whither he went. In verse 17, by faith Abraham offered Isaac. In verse 23 and following, by faith Moses refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. And then in verse 39, by faith the walls of Jericho fell down, and we know that happened when they acted upon the instructions of God in walking around the city and so forth. So our point here is a very simple one, and unfortunately a much needed one in our world today. Faith requires saving faith. The faith that pleases God requires strict obedience to His will. All right, that's a simple point, but I think really important. Another point that we learn from Abel is that acceptable worship requires more than just sincerity. As you recall the story of Cain and Abel, you know that Abel offered the animals from his flock, where Cain offered the fruit of the ground, the things that he had grown. There's nothing in the text or grammar of the Genesis account, in Genesis chapter 4, that indicates that Cain was less sincere or made a less honest attempt to worship. Look at that. In Genesis chapter 4, verse 3, in process of time it came to pass that Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering unto the Lord. Now, again, I want you to think about this, because I don't think there's anything in the wording of that would indicate that he was less than sincere. Or that this was anything less than an honest attempt to worship God. Now, some people might argue that his subsequent murder of Abel proved that he had a bad heart. Now, maybe you could make that argument. But I'm saying that in the way that the text is worded, there's not anything to indicate that he was insincere in his attempt to worship God. It was the sacrifice that's mentioned. It's not. So when God commended Abel, He didn't commend Abel for a better attitude. He commended Abel for a better sacrifice, right? It's what Abel actually did and what Cain actually did. It wasn't about who was more sincere than the other. Abel obeyed God. Cain did not. And so acceptable worship requires more than just good intentions or a sincere heart. In our world today, so many people think that's the acid test. If you have a good heart, everything else is good. But it wasn't true in the case of Cain and Abel. The problem that Cain had was that he believed that he could substitute something for what God had actually instructed. Again, I don't know that he was insincere in that, but he believed it would be okay if he substituted the things that he grew in the ground versus the animal sacrifice that God had instructed. And so, again, the idea that you can do whatever you want as long as you're sincere is really proven wrong in this famous Bible account. In 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7, it says, we walk by faith, not by sight. Notice, we do not walk by sight. And I would argue that the idea of what I see, what I think, what seems real or good to me, that's not how we walk. We're supposed to walk by faith. John chapter 4, verse 24 says, God is a spirit, and they that worship Him must worship Him in spirit and in truth. In spirit and in truth. And we often talk about the two parts there of acceptable worship. It's got to be from the heart. You've got to have the right spirit, but it's got to be according to God's truth as well. And so, again, in this famous historical account of Cain and Abel, we see that acceptable worship requires more than sincerity. I'm not discounting the importance of sincerity. I think Abel was certainly a sincere person. I'm not so sure that Cain wasn't also a sincere person, but sincerity wasn't the test here. The test was whether they did what God said or not. Abel did, Cain did not. And Cain proceeded, of course, to kill Abel, but Abel, being dead, yet speaketh. Another lesson learned from this account is that obedience, because obedience stands in real contrast to disobedience, the person who's obedient actually, in a way, condemns those who are disobedient. So here's the way I said it on the screen. Obedience, by contrast, condemns disobedience and often results in animosity and persecution. Now, again, as you look at the text in Genesis chapter 4, Abel's disobedience made Cain's disobedience obvious, and it provoked Cain's anger. Read that with me in Genesis 4, verse 5. Unto Cain and to his offering God had not respect, and Cain was very wroth, and his countenance fell. And the Lord said to Cain, Why art thou wroth? Why is thy countenance fallen? If thou doest well, shall not thou be accepted? And if thou doest not well, sin lieth at the door. And unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him. And Cain talked with Abel his brother, and it came to pass when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel his brother and slew him. So actually God had warned Cain before he ever proceeded to kill Abel. God had warned Cain that this was going the wrong way, that he could turn back, that he could do better, that he would be accepted. But Cain allowed his anger at Abel to proceed, and of course resulted ultimately in him murdering his brother. All right, now our point in this, so here's Abel, and his obedience was stood in stark contrast to what Cain did. And because what he did was accepted and what Cain did was not accepted, it provoked an animosity, a hatred. Cain hated his brother Abel and slew him. He was very wroth concerning this matter. I would suggest to you that the faithful people of God through all generations, including our generation, that the faithful people of God living in a wicked world stand out. They stand in contrast to what the people of the world are doing. And just as it did in this very early account of Cain and Abel, it continues even to our day. When faithful people live righteous lives, it stands in contrast to the world, and the world does not like that contrast. And they will revolt against it, and they will persecute those who are trying to do what is right. It's always been true. And it's still true in the world today. If we stand out distinctly as obedient people of God, then there's going to be a contrast between us and the others will like it. They never have. Notice what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 5, verse 11. Blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceeding glad, for great is your reward in heaven, for so persecuted they the prophets which were before you. I want you to notice that Jesus says when this happens. He didn't say if it will happen. He says when men shall revile and persecute you, say all manner of evil against you falsely. And so Jesus stated this as a distinct reality, not as just a possibility, but a reality. It's going to happen, and we need to be prepared for it. But it's always been the case, and it's always been the case all the way back to Cain and Abel. And one of the lessons that we learn, and Abel being dead still teaches this truth to us, that our obedience may well and often does and is indicated will provoke animosity and persecution. Finally, let me make this point, that a person's influence extends beyond the grave. I think we see that up here when you see that in our text in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 4, we have a present tense active verb. He speaketh. The Hebrew writer doesn't say he's dead and he spoke to us. It says he's dead and he's still speaking to us. He being dead yet speaketh. Have you ever thought about how someone that you knew who is dead had a strong influence over you? I was mentioning earlier my grandmother, that was an influential person in my life. We were just yesterday, Cindy and I were online watching a funeral of a preacher. His wife had passed. Johnny Edwards, Grant, you know Johnny Edwards. His wife passed last week, and the funeral was this past week. And it was, we watched the video of that funeral service and listened to it online yesterday. And I remember, so this was Johnny Edwards' wife who had passed. Johnny's still living. He's in his 90s. But I just happened to mention to Cindy that how back when I was a teenager, I thought that this preacher, Johnny Edwards, I just thought he was the greatest ever. I just loved to hear Johnny Edwards preach. And he would go 20 minutes. Grant, 20 minutes was a long sermon for Johnny Edwards. But Johnny Edwards could put more information in a 20-minute sermon than most men could put in a 45-minute sermon. He was just that way. And I said, I always thought that was great. And Cindy said, I think maybe he influenced you because that's the way you preach. Try to get a lot in a short amount of time. Maybe it's so. I never really thought about that. Maybe it's so. But what I'm saying is people have influences over us. And we may not even fully perceive the influences that they have over us, but they do. And that's true of you too. You are having an influence on other people. And that influence is going to go on beyond the grave. Even after you're gone. Abel, being dead, yet speaketh. You, when you're dead, you'll still be speaking to the people who knew you and were influenced by you. Now that influence, and we all have it, might be for good or for ill. What will it be in your case? The influence that extends beyond your death, will it be a good influence on others or maybe not so good? We need to really think about that. I want to wrap up here to illustrate this point, I want to reference an instance in the life of Jesus. In Matthew 26, now when you say Matthew 26, you know there's just 28 verses in Matthew. So we're right near the end of the life of Jesus, and he's soon to be crucified on the cross. So Matthew 26, beginning verse 6, now when Jesus was in Bethany, there came unto him a woman having an alabaster box of very precious ointment, and poured it on his head as he sat at meat. But when his disciples saw it, they had indignation, saying, to what purpose is this waste? And Jesus responded, in that she hath poured this ointment on my body, she did it for my burial. Verily I say unto you, wheresoever this gospel shall be preached in the whole world, there shall also this, that this woman hath done, to be told for memorial of her. Jesus said what was done there in anointing him would be something that would live on, and that wherever the gospel is preached, this would be referenced. Here we are, about 2,000 years later, and we're doing that very thing, right? We're doing exactly what Jesus said would happen. We're making reference to this woman who made this sacrificial gift to Jesus before he died. Our influence will live on. We won't live on like this woman lived on. We won't live on like Abel lived on in influence, but we will live on in influence. Our influence will extend beyond the grave. And we need to realize that and be thinking about how we are an important part of influencing other people in our lives. Abel, a lot to learn from Abel. He's mentioned there. This is chapter 11, verse 4 of Hebrews. He's the first one mentioned. Now that chapter, as you know, is going to go on and catalog a number of other great people of God. And the first one in that list is Abel. And we can certainly learn a lot from him. He being dead, yet speaketh. Thanks for your good attention to what we've had to say, and hope it's helpful and encourage us as we attempt to live our lives for the Lord. What's your status this morning? Are you in a right relationship with God? Have you obeyed that simple gospel plan? Hear, believe, repent, confess, be baptized for remission of sins. If you've not, we hope you'll make that decision without delay. If you're a Christian already, know that God observes your life. He knows everything about it. And also you're influencing other people in your lives. And if you're a Christian and you're not living right, other people are seeing that. God is seeing that. And you need to come back in repentance, confession, and prayer. If we can help in any way, let us know while we stand and sing this song.